The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding.
Order, order. Welcome to the meeting of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. Our session this morning follows our previous work on football governance and the need for a new financial deal for the football pyramid, and looks ahead to the introduction of the Football Governance Bill, which the Sports Minister told us was coming in the next couple of weeks. We live in hope. We are joined by Rick Parry, the Chair of the EFL, and Richard Masters, the Chief Executive of the Premier League. Welcome to you both. Before I start the questions, just a reminder to members to declare any relevant interests. Richard, can I start with you? Why did you pause discussions with the EFL on the new deal just before Christmas?
Well, if I could start by giving you a sort of progress report, I guess is the best way of doing it, and I'll get to the point about where we are in the process at the moment. When we last met as a committee, when we were discussing, and I know it is the strong preference of this group that football finds a way forward, football finds a way to do a deal and remove the need for a regulatory intervention at some point in the future, and we agree with that, and that's what we've been working towards over the past 6 to 9 months. This goes back to November 2022, when the Premier League got a mandate from its clubs to negotiate with the EFL and the FA on a whole host of issues that we felt needed reform, and indeed the EFL and the FA agree with us. So not just finance, but also financial regulation, the calendar, all sorts of other issues, immigration policy, those sorts of things. We've made very good progress on a lot of those issues. In fact, in the summer we agreed to deal with the FA in principle, a number of different points on calendar, on grassroots distributions, but an agreement with the EFL remains elusive. We've been swapping proposals with the EFL over the course of the summer and into October, and had counter proposals back. I actually think the list of issues between us is relatively slim, but they are critically important issues. We're now at a point where I think our clubs absolutely want to see all of the detail before we agree everything. So we're in a situation where everything has to be agreed before anything is agreed. And I accept there's some frustration around this committee table. It's the view of government we should come together, but it's still my view that the Premier League itself and also the clubs would prefer a solution. So at the moment we had 2 shareholder meetings just prior to Christmas. We tried to move this forward and resolve it and find...
A little bit, I'm struggling to hear you, I do apologise.
I'm doing my best. I'm speaking at full volume.
Okay.
Just prior to Christmas we had 2 shareholder meetings where we discussed the new deal in depth. Again, a commitment to try and move things forward. We haven't found the solution yet. We're going to come back to it in our next meeting in February. But some of the issues which are still at debate between us and also internally between the Premier League itself about trying to find resolution on exactly how financial regulatory system will work in the future. And I think there's an area of disagreement that remains between us on how cost controls are going to work. Because obviously if you're going to put more money into a system, that system has to be properly regulated. It's the watchword of the day, financial regulation within sport and within football. And that system is yet to be fully agreed on how Championship clubs and how relegated clubs and how Premier League clubs operate a common system.
So is that your sticking point at the moment, the regulation?
It's one of the sticking points. Also, internally, I think that our clubs want to understand how the financial regulatory system is going to work in the Premier League before agreeing how this whole system is going to work together. It's a big change. And obviously, since 2007, when solidarity payments started, we have managed to agree significantly improved deals over the course of that period of time, out of the glare of publicity by ourselves, bilaterally, by negotiation. This feels a little bit different. It is in the public eye. It has a sort of third party involved, if you like, which is a prospective regulator in the future. But again, it's another reform that we are seeking to bring to bear.
Okay, thank you, Damien.
That's the overall context. There's some confusion about the actual numbers that are flying around. There have been reports that the latest package is £925 million over 6 years, potentially reduced to £881 million if an immediate £44 million payment is ratified. But there have also been reports that 44 million, in fact, that offer is 88 million. So can you clarify what numbers are you talking about?
Well, I don't particularly want to go into all of the numbers, but I hope I can answer your question properly. In essence, the core of the deal is that one of the things we have agreed upon, in principle, is that in the future, the Premier League and the EFL will pool net media revenue together and put it into one pot and essentially divide it. And we've tried to spend a lot of time trying to work out what the current situation is, and if that change is made in the future, what would be the right percentage going forward. And essentially, solidarity has doubled. That system will kick in 25-26 if it is agreed, up with the first year when it works in full. This year and next, we've been discussing what the appropriate amounts are to put in advance of that full system coming into place. And obviously, we have had the elapsement of time. So the core offer has not changed at all. The offers in the early years are still debating with the clubs.
And okay, I mean, I get the point. You're still arguing about numbers, so you can't give exact figures. But whatever that number is the total amount acceptable to the EFL, Rick?
We are prepared to accept the amount which equates to 14.75% of the net media revenues. So over the first 5 years of the deal, bearing in mind the transitions, it does equate to around 125 million a year. It's a significant amount. What it doesn't do is to address any of the concerns that the government set out so eloquently in its response to the white paper. The gap, the cliff edge, the major divide between the Premier League and the Championship, or it certainly doesn't do anything to get rid of the perverse incentives that the parachute system creates. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's not the right answer. We're very committed to the regulator, as you know. We're very committed in particular to carrying out the review of the football system, the independent review. Our belief is when that is done, when that review is completed, it will show that there is still a major systemic issue. So we want the deal. We do understand the time value of money, and it's perhaps slightly poetic that, in a sense, we started this 4 years ago before this very committee when I appeared in May 2020 when we said we do need a major financial reset. Getting that money early, of course, is great for us, but as I said, we don't feel it addresses the major problems that still face the game.
And is that a sort of deal stopper?
No, we want to do the deal. We want to do the deal, but our point is, and our point has always been, nothing must prevent the regulator from achieving their primary strategic objective of securing the sustainability of the English pyramid.
So it feels like a lot of the big decisions, sorry, back to Richard, a lot of the big decisions are going to be left to the regulator.
Not necessarily. I mean, if you can come together. I mean, one of the points that we are debating is the certainty of the deal. This is a 6-year arrangement which will start this season at some point and goes straight through to 28-29. It's a 6-year arrangement. The regulator is going to come in mid-term during that agreement, and obviously our clubs would like to understand that the systemic changes we're making are going to stick. And on the face of it, there's some uncertainty about that, and that's been expressed by Rick this morning.
One of the points often made is that effectively it's difficult for the Premier League clubs themselves to be united because there is a big, I mean, argue the figure, call it 6 for the point, and the rest. Is that a problem for you, trying to corral them into one common position?
Well, it's historically very difficult to corral football clubs into common positions on issues like this. But, you know, we have had enormous amounts of consultation with the clubs on this particular topic. We don't believe we have sort of lost our mandate that we got in November of 2022. In our November 23 meeting, we had a go round the room and asked everyone their opinions, and there was a vast majority of clubs want to do this deal or want to do a deal, provided it's right for both parties. And I think one of the key concerns is certainty when we're moving into a different regulatory environment. So I have to resolve those issues and try and move forward.
Where do the fans come into this? I mean, the fact is that most people are not just fans of a particular club, Premiership club, for example. They are fans of football, and most Premiership fans will have a lower league club that they also support. People want to see this work together. Do you not feel that you have a duty to look after the fans and to come to a satisfactory arrangement as quickly as possible?
At the end of it, it is fans that matter. Without fans, we don't have a game. And so, in the end, it is up to the leaders of the game to come together on big issues, whether they be about financial regulation or any other big topic within the game. So absolutely, I think we both fully understand our responsibilities to do what's best for the whole game. The Premier League has been happy to share its success for a very long period. And of course, whilst we have many issues within our game, I think that other parts of European football would very happily swap their problems with ours. And we've got some fantastic stories to tell. The English football pyramid is envied all around the world. And so I don't like to paint a picture. I think that there are huge problems within the game. There are issues to fix. There's no doubt about that, and we will try and fix them as best we can and do that quickly. But there is much to be celebrated as well.
Okay. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Richard, if I can start with you. Is there an agreement among all Premier League clubs on the mechanism to calculate how much each club will contribute the total amount past the EFL?
No, and if I could just put that into context, there needs to be an agreement because the existing mechanisms that are in place don't cover this particular formulation of what we're trying to do. So there needs to be a fresh agreement on how this is going to be funded. We have made proposals to clubs. They are considering them. We don't yet have a unified position on it. So that's another thing that we have to agree with clubs.
So you say you've made proposals to the clubs. What is your proposal?
Our proposals, in broad terms, are to use some of the existing mechanisms that exist in cost allocations within the Premier League rulebook at the moment, and also to increase the transfer levy by a small percentage. The transfer levy is currently 4%. We make a small increase on the transfer levy to pay for part of it.
What are those other mechanisms you mentioned before that?
Well, the other mechanisms are the basic cost distribution methods within the Premier League rulebook.
And so why is that not reaching agreement with the clubs, do you think? What are their concerns?
This is a significant sum of money, and there are differences of opinion about how it should be ultimately funded. But as I said, I think we will find a solution to that. Perhaps more importantly is that we find the right mechanisms and the right policies to unite the clubs around the deal itself.
Mm-hmm. Are there any particular clubs that are more worried about this than others? I suppose ones that make the most money, one can assume.
Not necessarily, no. I think the concerns are commonly held. They may come at the issue from different angles, but it's not any particular club or group of clubs that are concerned about it. The concerns are widespread. How
far away do you think an agreement is?
So our next meeting is in February. We have a 2-day meeting, which we do that twice a year, in February and in June. On the first day, we'll be talking about financial regulation. I don't know whether it's known, but the current system we have at the moment, the PSR system, we are contemplating making some change with that over time. And we have some proposals out for consultation with our clubs about moving and aligning more with the UEFA system. So UEFA has spent 2 years changing its financial regulations over the past number of years, away from their what we used to be called FFP to something called squad cost ratio, which is a different calculation, more of a wage to turnover ratio type calculation. And because over time we have historically aligned with UEFA, because 7 or 8 of our clubs are in European competitions, we need to consider whether that is an appropriate move for us and how we do that and when. So that's sort of a large chunk of day one, and on day 2 it's the normal shareholders meeting when we will be discussing again the new deal.
Would you expect a resolution to come on during that conference next month?
I expect us to move forward. I don't necessarily expect it to be the moment when we formalise things. No, we need the time to make sure that all aspects of the deal are fully understood by everybody.
Right. And so if no agreement's made next month and this continues to rumble on and on and on, I mean, how will you manage to corral the clubs to actually get to an agreement? How can you do that?
In the normal way, by talking to them and meeting with them, and we have scheduled meetings.
So this could push it down the road.
No, it's not. It isn't. I mean, in the end, it gets to the point where hopefully we can come to an agreement about what to do.
And if you
provided
don't,
the deal is right, then we're in a sort of no deal scenario, I guess, if you get to that point.
And then what happens?
Well, the existing agreements remain until we change them.
Right. So it does feel like this could be kicked down the road.
I should make clear is that there is no cliff edge in terms of Premier League funding. Our agreement remains in place and will remain in place until it's changed. So there isn't a sort of issue.
Forgive me. It feels like this could be kicked down the road for months, years.
You're trying to prompt me into telling you when it's going to happen. Well,
I'm not. I'm just trying to say. I want to understand, how urgent you consider this to be.
I consider it to be the number one priority of the Premier League, but I have said that quite a number of times. So, I want to come to a conclusion on this process.
Right. Okay. Rick, is there anything you want to add to this discussion? Any thoughts about mechanisms or what you've just heard around timescales?
Well, we're concerned about timescales, and I think one of the points I'd like to add is that this is a very topical week. We have 8 FA Cup replays, 8 EFL teams involved. Next week we have 2 finely poised semi-final second legs of the Carabao Cup. We know there are challenges with the calendar because of additional UEFA games, Champions League dates. Premier League's position has been the rest of the game has to change and move to accommodate them. We did suggest remedy was in the Premier League's hands. They could reduce to 18 clubs. That would solve the problem. That didn't seem to go down very well. As part of the total system and as part of a new deal, we're prepared to take on board considerable loss of revenue to our clubs from loss of FA Cup replays, from second leg of the Carabao. We're absolutely not prepared to concede those on the basis there is no deal. There is no presumption that the Premier League can just change the fixture schedule and we will fall into line without proper compensation. That is becoming urgent because the Premier League has already published its fixture schedule for next year, a fixture schedule that we have not agreed to. In a sense, that is the most urgent thing. Clearly, we would like some money as a matter of urgency, but we've wanted that since 2020. Our clubs will probably survive. More important to us that we get the right deal. And more important to us, this isn't about the EFL versus the Premier League. This is about the future of 100 clubs and the pyramid. Just more than 20 years ago, in 91-92, we voted on the constitution of the Premier League. We made it happen. 3 of the clubs that were around the table then, Luton Town, Notts County, Oldham Athletic, who played a key part, have been down or are down in the National League. Luton have bounced back and straight back into the Premier League. Notts County rejoined us. Oldham still in the National League. That is the essence of the pyramid. That's why the pyramid matters. And another point I'd like to make on that, which I think is a really telling one and perhaps sums up where we're coming from, the 14 clubs who are the non-permanent members of the Premier League have been in the Premier League for an average of 13 years each. The 14 clubs in the EFL who had the longest tenure whilst they were in the Premier League, ironically, have also had an average of 13 years in the Premier League. They have made an equal contribution over time to the success of the Premier League. This season, the 14 clubs in the Premier League will receive £1.8 billion between them in media revenues. The 14 currently in the EFL will receive 90 million, less than 90 million, less than 5%. That is the chasm we're trying to bridge.
So does it feel like this is the number one priority for the Premier League to you?
Well, the Premier League could have chosen to do this deal, frankly, any time over the last 30 years. We would say they've chosen not to. In the last 3 years, since we've been addressing this in earnest, the Premier League clubs have chosen to increase their wages by £500 million. This is choice.
Yeah.
This should be done, and it could have been done.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Jay.
Thank you, Chair. Richard, can I just ask, the agreement, do you expect all the Premier League clubs to sort of agree in the end, or are you aiming to get 14 clubs sort of a minimum, and then will you decide that's enough sort of agreement?
Clearly, I would much prefer that all Premier League clubs were happy to agree to something than merely achieve a constitutional majority and move forward on that basis. That's what I would aim to achieve.
Do you expect it to happen from your discussions so far?
That's what I'm aiming to do, yes. That's what I'm aiming to do.
Oh, I hope so. Rick, I'd like to move on to the financial controls that come along with this deal. Are they fair? Do you consider the ones mooted at the moment fair about youth teams, about the parachute payments being maintained?
No, in a word. I'll try and keep this brief because it does become quite complex. We have a situation at the moment with the profit and sustainability rules, which is a rather quaint name because our championship clubs are neither profitable nor sustainable. But as has been well publicised, the annual loss limits in the Premier League are 35 million. In the EFL, they're 13. They're stricter in the Championship. When we move to the squad cost ratio rules, which we are completely in favour of as a matter of principle, we understand that within the Premier League, the thinking is that the clubs competing in Europe, those with more money, will be able to spend 70% of their revenue on wages. The other clubs will be able to spend 85%. The proposal is put to us, or the insistence, the condition that's been imposed upon us is that within the Championship, the parachute clubs will be able to spend 85%, the others will be able to spend 70%, which is 180 degrees different from the position in the Premier League. And the implications of that are that not only do they spend 85% of revenues, they spend 85%, of course, of their parachute money as well, and of transfer profits. And transfer profits fluctuate, but at the moment, the 3 clubs currently in the first year of the parachutes have an average transfer profit of 50 million each. It's very, very considerable. Our calculations at the moment, and bear in mind that they are a snapshot, the implications of the revenue share proposed and the new cost controls mean that the Year 1 parachute clubs will be able to spend £110 million each on wages. The other clubs will be able to spend 30 million. The stark choice that our championship clubs are making and are discussing, because again, we were looking at allowing owner funding to compensate over on top of the cost controls. Premier League had proposed 30%. Acting very responsibly, the Championship clubs have essentially said, our definition of sustainability is reducing the dependence on owner funding, which is around 15 million a club. We've been discussing limiting the owner funding to 5 million a club on top, using any money we get from the Premier League to reduce the owner funding, bringing the owner funding commitment down. But in doing so, we reduce the capacity to spend to about 20 million. The clubs have had to decide between sustainability and competitiveness, which is a horrible choice. It's a ridiculous choice for the system, because at the end of the day, they cannot compete.
And would that owner funding, would that apply to teams relegated from Premier League as
No,
well?
the relegated teams would be able to spend 110 million. We would be constraining the other clubs to spending 20.
And so basically this advantage is significant.
Worse than it is at the moment.
What suggestions would you like revisited? Are you still discussing this? Is it still to be agreed?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a long playing record, if we got the distribution right, we wouldn't need parachute payments. Now, we're not trying to kill the clubs coming down, because, as I said, this is all about making 100 clubs sustainable. I think one of our concerns is the parachute system, we say is unfair, but also it's a very blunt instrument. So a club that's been in the Premier League for 10 years, we accept completely will have a cost base that's difficult to change overnight, as compared with a club that's been up for a year, a Luton Town, for example, who might be able to adjust. We're more than happy to study a fairer method, a balanced method, which is based on need, not based on enabling them to bounce straight back up.
What does that look like from... Yes, we are. But what does a model look like that sets a more level playing field for relegated clubs and clubs that have already been...
I think it's one that has an assessment of need rather than as a figure plucked from the sky.
Do you mean the wage reduction for players that are going with
look at their
club?
cost base, look at their, not just the players' wages, but just look at the cost base of the club, the size of the club, look at their revenue base, the turnover. It's just make it a proper economic analysis. Because I said we don't want them to come down and be plummeting straight into administration. We want them to come in and compete. What we don't want is the grossly unfair system where we have at the moment, where in the last 6 years, each of the last 6 years, and let's keep the facts really, really simple, in each of the last 6 years, 2 of the 3 promoted clubs have been parachute clubs. That's not fair.
There is, by nature, to balance those two needs of being fair to the relegated clubs and to the clubs already in the Championship, that is sort of a possibly unsolvable equation.
No, not with a will. Why would it be unsolvable if we all have a will to do it and sit around the table and said, look, here is the objective, it's about...
But will people not disagree about what is fair at some point? I think there will always be a...
Yes, I wonder if anybody had thought of an independent regulator who might bring a different view.
That sounds like an interesting idea. It does sound like an interesting... Will you, if you don't get shifts on the financial controls, will you agree to it anyway, ultimately?
We don't have a great deal of choice. The Premier League is dominant, and at the end of the day, what else do we do? We can't go and attach ourselves to La Liga. We actually don't have a choice.
Yeah. That is true. Can I, Richard, just briefly, clubs spending 85% of the relegated clubs going and spending 85% of money, is that reasonable, and do you think there is some disadvantage, and how can we make this slightly less?
Well, this is a conundrum, but I just want to address a few things that Rick has said. So we are considering moving to the squad cost ratio model that UEFA have adopted, but that isn't agreed yet. The EFL are agreed on in principle. In principle, I guess the Premier League are now in the midst of discussing it about whether we want to introduce it. The UEFA level is at 70%, so our clubs the clubs at the top will be subject to those controls. And if we have a very similar system, at the moment we have the profitability and sustainability rules that provide an advantage to non-European clubs at the moment. So European clubs aren't allowed to lose 105 million over 3 years, but it's exactly the same system. We've tried to calibrate it to provide the same advantages to Premier League clubs in the bottom half of the system so they can aspire to be in Europe. And of course in Europe this year we have Aston Villa returning to European action, Brighton also in Europe for the first time, and those are good things that we think. The question is, what happens to relegated clubs when they come down into the Championship? And we think it's a really difficult adjustment to make from being a Premier League club to a Championship club financially. And I, as you know, I do not think that parachute payments should be removed. They're a critically important part of the Premier League system. In order for clubs promoted to Premier League to compete, they have to know that they're able to invest. Otherwise, they won't be able to compete in a league. They won't be able to play their part in a division that shares its success with the rest of the pyramid. And so, if we were to remove parachutes at any point, they would have a dramatic impact on the competitive balance in the Premier League, and I think to its significant detriment, which would be to a detriment to its value, which means we'd be sharing less value with the people we are trying to share it with. There's a very circular argument to all this. So Rick's right, there has to be a will to resolve that issue, and that's where one of the sticking points is, about how you calibrate the financial regulations between European clubs, Premier League clubs in the bottom half of the league, relegated clubs going into the Championship, and then non-parachute clubs in the Championship, so they all have a fair and reasonable crack at progress, because that's what people want. We have no different objectives, we just have a difference of opinion about how you should do it. So I also want to address the calendar point. What Rick is essentially saying is that so we have an agreement basically on the calendar in principle, but unless the money is sorted, the calendar bit won't come through. So that we are absolutely clear, the Premier League cannot impose on other parts of football a calendar solution. We have an agreement in place called the Working Practices Agreement, where the Premier League, the FA and the EFL have signed up that no party should impose a solution on others. All we have done is make suggestions. And I think that the notion that there are 6 clubs, we've been looking at the 14 clubs in the Premier League and how long they've been in there. There are, I think, 6 ever present in the Premier League. And of course, at the moment, you also have 6 clubs in the Premier League who've gone up without parachutes, including Luton, Brighton, Brentford, people that have made a success of their promotion and have managed to stay up and stay competitive. They would not, I believe, be able to do that without parachute payments. So this is all about calibration, trying to find the right formula. I agree. I just don't agree with Rick's solution. But where there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you. And I know another colleague has got some questions around parachute payments specifically. Just finally, Richard, you've said that the New Deal payment, it should be it should have a purpose on things like facilities. What does an ideal kind of what result would you like to see from New Deal funding?
Well, the gap that we've concentrated on in the Championship is the gap between parachute clubs and non-parachute clubs. And if the proposal we are working at the moment were to be agreed by both sides, that would halve the gap between parachute clubs and non-parachute clubs. I've said I don't recognise the numbers that Rick has used about the ability to fund, and I'm very happy to discuss those after the event. But obviously we're trying to make non-parachute clubs, give them an advantage over their current financial situation, which would increase their competitiveness within a division. I don't think anybody should be surprised that relegated clubs are very competitive within the division they come into. But one of the topics we had, the topics of discussion, was about an infrastructure fund for League 1 and League 2 clubs. I'm pleased to see it has survived. We wanted it to be bigger than it was, but the League 1 and League 2 clubs preferred to have the cash to put into their P&Ls rather than to create an infrastructure fund. And so the size of that fund has shrunk from, I think, £24 million to £9 million as part of the current working proposals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Clive.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, and wish I could say we're pleased to see you here, but unfortunately the circumstances is rather disappointing that you have to be here. Can I start with you, Richard? What's your primary objective in the negotiations with the Football League?
To do a deal that works for the whole of the game.
For the whole of the game?
Yeah.
Not for the Premier League?
It has to work for the Premier League and for the rest of the game.
So, but I mean, would you say that your role, one part of your role, is to ensure that we have a competitive championship?
I think the championship is a fantastic competition, and I think it is competitive. Television broadcasters love it. They've just put a 45% increase on the price of championship rights. Attendances are going through the roof. It's an extremely vibrant pyramid.
So, if you look at the money that was received by the bottom Premiership League club, the figure that I've seen is that club got £97.6 million in payments at the finish of the season, and the top non-parachute EFL club got £8 million. Now, if I was an owner of a non-parachute club, how long would I continue to subsidise a club when you're up against that sort of resources for parachute teams?
One of the potential solutions we have looked at for that, because of course the distribution methodologies within the Premier League are the most egalitarian within European football, and I believe that's one of the great successes of the Premier League. It's what provides this unquantifiably valuable commodity of jeopardy.
Sorry, what's egalitarian? What is? Sorry, what's egalitarian?
I'm coming onto your point, Clive, which is the gap between the bottom of the Premier League and non-parachute clubs, is that in the Championship, all of the revenue is shared equally. There is no merit rake in the Championship, and so therefore there is a huge drop. So whether you finish first or 24th in the Championship, unless you're a parachute club, you get the same amount of money. Whereas in the Premier League, you are obviously incentivised to be successful, but not in a way you are in Spain or Germany or France, where the curve is much deeper. So what I'm saying is that one of the great successes of the Premier League is to be able to create, all clubs have ability to create competitive teams, which is what creates the excitement, which is what drives the value. In the Championship, the decision's been made for good reasons, to divide it all equally, which obviously creates this very large gap.
But I mean, if you don't mind me saying so, that really just that does sound like the heart of the problem to me. That the Premier League wants to not only run the Premier League, but it wants to dictate how the competition is organised within the Football League as well.
We can't dictate to the EFL what they do.
Well,
it's their decision ultimately.
Well, okay, but if we those clubs that come down are allowed to spend 85% of revenue on salaries, whereas EFL clubs are only spending 70%. Is that pushing EFL clubs into being reliant on club owners to invest in their club and subsidise the club?
Well, they will get more revenue as part of the overall mechanic.
But that difference is there still. Why does a parachute club going into a competition in the Championship, why does it get to spend 85% of its revenue on salaries?
Because of the adjustment that was required. I mean, these are the numbers that I think we have to play with, and we have to work out what the right solution is, Clive. This is where there is a disagreement between the teams working on this, not in a sort of like an adversarial sense. It's just that what is the right formula. And I agree with you. These are issues that do need to be resolved, but they're not simple. If they were, we'd have done it by now.
But so I mean, just talking as a fan, I support a championship side. My club generally is a trampoline club that goes between the First Division and the Championship rather than the Premier League. But I go to pay my money, go and watch the game. There's a parachute club playing against us. They've got one player on the pitch that costs more than the entire squad of my club. Now, how is that creating a fair and equal competition that is sustainable in the future? I mean, why would owners hang around in a competition where the outcome is fixed in favour of clubs that have come out of the Premier League?
Well, I think that if you're asking why would owners hang around, actually, there's quite a vibrant market for EFL clubs. We think the system does require reform, and that's why we're working on these proposals to make it, as you call it, fairer, to give everyone a chance to aspire. And that's, I think, the main thing about the pyramid is, if you are Luton and you've been all the way down to the bottom, you can come all the way back to the top. And the current system delivers that. We've seen it in action. But if we can make it stronger and more sustainable, of course that's what the regulator's primary interest is in It's in sustainability, not necessarily competitive balance or what you might describe as fairness.
So, I mean, we call it a pyramid, but actually it's not shaped like a pyramid at all. It's just got a cliff edge that clubs fall off, into the Championship. But you must accept, surely, Richard, that the embarrassment of riches that clubs that are relegated from the Premier League enjoy over several seasons, above those of the existing EFL clubs, distorts the competition. It's inevitable, isn't it?
Well, if you want to look at various
well,
data
it's
points,
yes or no, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't believe it's distorting to the point that perhaps you're suggesting. Of course, parachute clubs have an advantage. They've just been in the Premier League. If you're a club in the Premier League that's been there for some time and you come down, you're coming down with a very expensive squad. You may have relegation clauses in place to help you balance your books. You require that parachute payment. You're going to be competitive in the Championship. I don't want to see relegated clubs plummet like a stone to the bottom of the Championship. What would be the point in that? So this is all about balance. As I said, I agree with that the debate needs to be had on this topic and new resolutions found. But I don't agree with the central premise that the whole system is completely unfair.
Okay. Richard, do parachute payments distort competition in the Championship?
Yes.
And so what's the likelihood of a club that's been relegated from the Premiership being promoted back into, we see Leicester right now, but they're being promoted back into the Premier League?
Well, I think when we were before you last time, I don't want to spend too much time on old ground. Academic analysis suggests that the parachute clubs over the last 3 years are 3 times more likely to be promoted than non-parachute clubs. Premier League didn't much like the simple arithmetic that demonstrated that. So today, as I said, make it simpler. In each of the last 6 years, 2 of the 3 clubs promoted have been parachute clubs. So it is a distortion. No question it's a distortion and it's not fair. Richard touched on merit rakes, and it perhaps characterises the nature of the negotiations, because if you want to reduce the cliff edge, we're completely committed to merit rakes. Our suggestion was that we have a 2-to-1 merit rake in the Premier League and the Championship, which would go a long way towards narrowing the gap. Premier League's response was they're not moving their merit rake from the 1.6 to 1, but the Championship should have a 3-to-1 merit rake, which we just think again is completely unfair and it's just not balanced.
But I mean, I made the point to Richard that the Premier League goes too far in terms of dictating the competition within the Championship. Would you say that that's where they are in the negotiations?
Well, essentially yes, in as much as the Premier League, Richard says they're not able to dictate, but they make it a condition of the agreement. And one of the clauses in the agreement, which we have resisted, for example, is that whilst we're introducing strict new rules, that when the relegated clubs come down, all they have to do is to use reasonable endeavours to comply with the rules in the Championship. Well, that's no form of regulation. They get a free pass to get straight back up again without complying with the new rules. So it is imbalanced.
And I mean, I made the point as well. Why would an owner of a non-parachute club, keep pouring money into their to subsidise their club if there's no prospect of, or the prospect of promotion is very remote? Is that a realistic description of the situation that exists in the Championship at the moment?
It is, and it's very topical because we've seen it with Derby County. Owner put hundreds of millions in an attempt to get to the Premier League, got to the playoff finals, didn't quite make it, decided to stop funding. Club very nearly went out of existence. We've seen it to an extent with Wigan Athletic, and very topical now because it's precisely what's happened with Reading. Incurred losses, pre-tax losses of almost 100 million. So when the new owner came in 2017, it's not that he didn't put money into the club, arguably put too much money into the club, failed to get to the playoffs, just missed it by one place, and then decided to stop funding. And that's then catastrophic for the club. Everybody can see the impact on Reading. It's the system that's broken.
So,
The system needs fixing properly.
so there weren't people queuing up to take Reading over then?
That's precisely the point. No, why would there be?
So
And again, if we go back to our fundamental purpose, making clubs sustainable, reducing or eliminating the dependence on owner funding, Chair touched on the question of supporters. I mean, our model is that it would be feasible in the future with proper redistribution for clubs to be fan-owned without the need for endless subsidy and owners who come and then go.
And Richard, you just said to us that that there was an appetite for people to take over Championship clubs. You just heard Rick describe the situation at Reading. That doesn't seem to be the case.
I'm not sure that Reading are potentially on everyone's list, but there are many new owners that come into the Championship and are prepared to support their clubs. That was the point you were making to me.
Okay, Chair, thank you.
Rick, you brought up the subject of Reading. This is where I declare an interest. I've been a Reading fan since the 1960s. I was there on Saturday. There was a pitch invasion deliberately designed to cause an abandonment of the game, to bring this terrible situation to people's notice. I don't do pitch invasions, but I absolutely share the anger of my fellow fans, and it takes a lot. I mean, Reading famously jokes about itself as the most middle-class club in Britain. We were once sponsored by Waitrose. So it takes a lot to get to this stage, and the only hooligan associated with Reading Football Club is Di Young, the owner. That you have a lot of frustrated, angry, worried fans watching their club die before their eyes. So the basic question is, what is the EFL doing to stop this club dying?
Well, if we take a little step back, and I'm not going to ignore the question at all, that we need to change the system, because as Clive has said, this is exactly the problem that we have. We have a succession of boom and bust, owners who come in, throw money, doesn't work, and then they walk away. We've seen it with other clubs. What are we trying to do with Reading? We share the fans' concern, we absolutely do. We're trying to take action against Di Young, the owner. Reading has fallen foul of our profit and sustainability rules, and as you are well aware, has suffered the punishments. And to be fair to Reading, they did come clean, they were transparent, acknowledged the problem, and the problem was about throwing too much money, chasing the Holy Grail. It always fails, always results in major problems. Just before Christmas, we took action against the owner, not against the club, in an attempt to get him disqualified. Disciplinary panel found on that occasion that it was not warranted. They fined him instead. And frankly, fining Di Young is of no use at all. If he won't put money into the club, he's not going to pay the fines. We're meeting fan groups this afternoon. We want a new owner. We want a resolution to the problem, just as much as the Reading. Don't ever believe that the EFL doesn't care. We do care. We don't want to be losing clubs, but we're not in a position where we can actually easily force him to divest of the club.
That's sort of the root of my question. So you don't have the powers actually to save a club in this situation?
It's complex. We have the powers to potentially to disqualify the owner. What we don't have the power to do is to force a sale.
And talk about disqualify the owner. I was talking to the supporters groups, and if you like, the word on the street is that he now doesn't want to sell. He's just asset stripping, and he's doing it quite visibly with players. We're beginning to see he wants a fire sale of any players with any value for what little he can get, and basically wants to be left with the training ground as a piece of property, having folded the club as he folded two clubs before. Now, I don't want to get too historical about this, but he was approved to be an owner, and he's someone who in two different countries has killed off two football clubs already. It seems to me pretty extraordinary that he was ever allowed into the English game in those circumstances. But nevertheless, we are where we are. What happens if you disqualify him as an owner? And I'm glad the EFL tried to do it the last time we went round this course, and sad that the independent panel didn't do this. What happens to the club if you disqualify the owner?
If you have a disqualified owner, then the natural consequence or the logical consequence for that owner is to divest. Whether Di Young is going to do anything that's logical, frankly, remains to be seen. What we're trying to do is to explore every possible avenue that's open to us. That is the most logical one, that rather than punishing the club, punishing the fans, we start to punish the owner in an attempt to force a resolution. We can't promise that that resolution is going to work. If we can find better solutions, different solutions. One of the things I ought to touch on, by the way, is that, again, one of the elements of the profit and sustainability rules that we had major concerns about was which we were forced to adopt, was the ability of owners to sell assets. So Reading sold the stadium and they sold the training ground, it's absurd that that's allowed to happen. Unfortunately, that loophole has been closed, but unfortunately that again is a legacy of inadequate rules, but that doesn't take us any further forwards. But we will explore every possible avenue to resolve. I mean, what normally happens in this situation, sadly, is that clubs, of course, go into administration, and at least then there's a process. That happened with Derby, it happened with Wigan. Then at least there is a process overseen independently where the club can be saved. It's pretty extraordinary for an owner to effectively just sit there and do nothing. That's a new one. We haven't seen that one before, so it's a fresh challenge. But we are absolutely committed to trying to solve the problem. What I don't have is an instant solution.
I mean, everyone's been agreeing, nobody's queuing up to buy. That's not what the report suggests. There are people out there who would happily, and being realistic about it, they might think, well, it's going to end up in administration where you can pick it up more cheaply. But if there might be a competition then. But if there are owners out there, but the owner doesn't want to sell, I mean, what we're hearing is that there isn't anyone. It's not you, not some potential independent regulator. In those circumstances, there is very, very little that anyone can do actually to make an owner act in his apparent own financial interests.
Well, the good thing is with the drafts that we've seen so far in terms of how the independent regulator operate, the regulator will have those powers, statutory powers, to force divestment. And that's a massive step forward, and it's one of the reasons we are hoping that we get the regulator as soon as possible.
Yeah, sadly we're not going to get it in the next 3 weeks, which I think is the sort of time frame we're looking at.
Agreed.
For Reading. But you say you're meeting the fans groups today?
Today, yeah. Again, yes. Yeah.
With any sort of proposition or?
Not a clear proposition, as I said. There isn't an obvious single solution. We do feel it's important to continue the communication with the supporters groups to work together, because we do have a shared objective.
And is there? Sorry, one last thing. I'm conscious I'm taking up time on a personal obsession, but I think it's an important illustration of where the game has got to. You've managed to make the distinction already about punishing the owner and not the club, i.e. the players, the staff, the fans. Do you intend to maintain that distinction in any future disciplinary matters?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, so it depends what disciplinary matters might be presented to us. That is absolutely our stated intent and position. The club has had points deductions for breaching non-payment rules. If they breach those rules in the future, then who knows what will happen, because we have a duty to 72 clubs. We have to think of the other 71 clubs who are not breaching the rules. But as I said, at the moment, our focus is very much on the owner, and in that sense, our aims and the supporters' aims are aligned, and we share that. We understand their frustrations.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Damien. Alex.
Thank you. We've just heard, Rick, you mentioned the regulator and the chair and Damien have both reference the football regulation, which we do expect, I think, in the current ministerial language to be tabled imminently and for us to take it through the House. I've read that the EFL and the Premier League views are not the same. You've already shown a lot of support for the introduction of the regulator. What effect has the impending bill and the introduction of the regulator played in terms of the interaction between the EFL and the Premier League in terms of not reaching an agreement? Rick, do you want to start on that?
I don't know if it's had a direct bearing on not reaching agreement, because reaching agreement has been challenging in any event. I think had it not been for the threat of the regulator, we probably wouldn't be as far on as we are, however far that is. So, I mean, yes, we do have different positions, and we want the regulator broadly. I don't think the Premier League does. As it gets closer and closer, or perhaps as we see the bill, either that will could have two effects. It could either speed the negotiations, or frankly, it could slow them down further, because people might think, well, we'll just wait and see what the regulator brings. So our position is we want to get the deal done as rapidly as possible.
And Richard, the Premier League?
I think it has a subtle but significant impact on the discussions, because there is an unknown third party, in the sense that there is somebody, the regulator will come in, it will have backstop powers. That has been made clear to us through our discussions with government, and be able to intervene in this discussion if we don't come to an agreement. So therefore it must have some sort of subtle but significant impact on the discussions, because someone will step in if we can't come to an agreement. So it does provide have an impact on it. Whether it's the specific reason why we haven't yet done a deal, I like Rick, I'm not sure that is the case. But I think both of us, whatever our views on the regulator that have been expressed around this table in the past, both of us, I do believe, want a football solution, not a regulator-imposed one.
So are you hoping or calculating that the government won't be able to pass the bill, say, this season or in this session of Parliament, so you can carry on making the decisions between the Premier League?
Well, I've given up calculating when the bill might be published. That's a matter for government. Obviously, we had the Sports Minister's comments around this table last week. It was in the King's speech. We're expecting it to be published, and when it is, we're very interested to read it, because obviously we haven't had sight of it. We've had an enormous amount of consultation with government on the policies that sit behind the bill, and we've been an active participant in all of that, as you'd expect.
You've just said you've been an active participant, so what changes have you asked the government to make in terms of the proposal for the regulator? What have you asked the regulator?
Well, at all times, I don't want to go into specifics, but at all times we've been trying to work with government to create a regulatory regime that can work with the industry and be effective for the industry. And I think that our views have been listened to in part, but ultimately it's up for government to decide what goes into the bill. That's their role. So as I said, we've played an active role in all of that. But we need to read the bill, and to some extent we're looking forward to doing that.
Okay, and part of your role is to represent your clubs in the Premier League to the government. Have clubs expressed your position to the regulator, and if so, which ones?
Sorry, which clubs have
expressed opposition to the regulator?
So we did an all-club response to the white paper. We put in a Premier League response, and all 20 clubs put in a response. Clubs have met with DCMS during the course of this period, invited in to have discussions. So those discussions have taken place, if that's the point you're seeking clarity on.
You've obviously got a situation now with points deductions at clubs. An independent regulator might play a different role post that. Obviously, we haven't got the legislation yet. But we've obviously been through the white paper. From the EFL's point of view, what do you hope to see in that legislation? What's your major asks of the government?
So I think that we're very supportive of the direction that government is taking. We've participated, we think, constructively. We actually rather like the licensing system. And so our purpose is making clubs sustainable. And what that requires is two things: a fairer system of distribution, redistribution, which means money being given up and more coming down, substantially more. But it also means better regulation, because you have to make sure the clubs aren't profligate. So we're major fans of better regulation, and we'd prefer that in many ways the regulation was done within football. But if it's the right regulation, frankly, we don't mind who does it, provided there's transparency, competence. And we do think that by having statutory powers, the regulator will have a major advantage that no football body can actually have. That will be invaluable in terms of owners and directors tests, gathering better information, compelling clubs to provide information. So very supportive in that sense. Backstop powers have been touched on. For us, that is absolutely fundamental, that the regulator must have the power to actively intervene in the event that the regulator is unable to meet its primary statutory objective, which is to secure the sustainability of the pyramid for the benefit of fans and communities. The regulator must have that power to intervene. The regulator will have an independent view, an objective view, and we hope we'll be able to break the logjam that football patently isn't capable of breaking. We have said on a number of occasions we do see a paradox in the government's position in the response to the white paper. The response to the white paper, the government says that the market has been unable to regulate football, which we accept, but then it says but the market can sort out redistribution. Well, it patently can't. It patently can't, because it hasn't. It said it could have been done any time in the last 30 years if the will was there. And again, we've also said that we can save, given that the regulator is also going to focus on the sustainability of individual clubs, we can save the regulator a lot of time by pointing out that 2/3 of our clubs are insolvent without redistribution. So what is the regulator going to do? Refuse to give them all a licence, put them all out of business? We hope not. But if we don't grasp the redistribution point, and again, the odd to say, well, we'll just leave football to find a solution. It has to be the right solution. As we said, the first step for the independent regulator is to carry out this major, objective, comprehensive state of football review. We applaud that, we support it. In fact, the only thing we've said is we wish it could have started a year ago, but we are where we are. Surely the outcome of that is going to dictate whether the regulator is actually able to achieve its primary strategic purpose. If it isn't, the regulator has to be able to step in and act.
So you're looking for the bill now, post-white paper, to give powers to the regulator for redistribution?
Yes.
Over and above. And then finally, in terms of your club, same sort of question as Richard, is the uniformity of view about the regulator, or are there mixed views about bringing a regulator in amongst EFL clubs?
Unanimity of view in football would be a novel concept.
The Premier League seems to have it.
Broadly, I think we would say yes, they're very supportive. A number of our clubs have been in to see DCMS, as indeed have a number of Premier League clubs. Our understanding is they've been engaging constructively. So yes, I would say pretty much across the piece our clubs are united. They want a better future, they want a better system, they know the current system is broken.
And finally, Richard, if we were to meet after this, during the passage of the bill, would you be lobbying me to vote in favour of the bill or against it?
I wouldn't be lobbying you at all.
Would you be, all right, what would your view be? Should I vote in favour of the bill or against it?
That's the same question before. I mean, I'm absolutely sure if the bill is published, it will pass. So
we will be lobbying you to vote in favour.
I guess that already. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning. Richard, the last time you were in front of this committee, I asked you a lot of questions around kicking it into the long grass in terms of the football regulator. I'm sure you remember that. And you denied absolutely that you'd ever said that to anybody. I've had it confirmed by the same people since that they absolutely say that is what you've said. But aren't your actions proving that's what you're doing?
if I recall, was that it had been mentioned in club meetings.
None have mentioned club meetings.
We listened to it, and I don't recall ever mentioning kicking anything into the long grass.
Okay. So
again,
is that what you want to do with the independent regulator?
Sorry?
Isn't that what you want to do with the independent regulator?
Well, the independent the white paper has been published. Mm-hmm. The King's Speech, the legislation was announced in the King's Speech. The Sports Minister was around this table talking about the publication of the bill. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's happening. I'm totally accepting of the bill and the regulator coming in after that bill.
With backstop powers.
And it is our understanding that it will include backstop powers. We've had lots of discussions with the government about how those backstop powers should operate. And as I said, it's up to government to decide what powers to give to the regulator, and that obviously will be revealed in the bill, which I haven't seen.
If we move on to the public perception of this whole thing that's going on, and in particular fans' perception, and as you've both agreed at different points during this session, fans are the lifeblood of the game. And, you know, in my constituency, an incredibly vocal group of people. How aware are you of what they feel about this issue?
We have lots of interaction with fan groups via the FSA, so we have constant dialogue with fan groups, and our clubs feed it back to us as well. So we know that fans are keen that the leaders of football come to wide-ranging agreements on all the big topics. We're absolutely aware of that. So, as I said, and I've repeated around this table, it is incumbent upon us to try and come to a football solution. As Rick said, it has to be the right deal for everybody. So
you've mentioned the FSA. Their annual survey showed that 9 out of 10 fans back an independent regulator. They feel they got you out of the mess of the European Super League, and they feel that you're not listening to them now. What would your comment on that be?
I do think we listen to fans. I absolutely do. Do you want me to comment on I'm absolutely aware of those data points as well. So we know that fans want something to be done, and we're aware of it.
So why aren't you acting on it?
We are. So we're I've tried to demonstrate to the committee today all the actions the Premier League has taken to move the debate forward, to get to a point where there can be a consummation of the proposals we're talking about. We're not there yet. I accept that as a frustration to the committee and indeed to government. But that's what we're working on.
And Rick, what would your comment on that be?
In terms of the fan survey?
The
or
fan
the fans'
survey
opinion?
And what Richard has just said.
Well, we're very aware of what fans think. We're aware of the FSA survey. We've carried out similar surveys, and we're also aware of an independent YouGov survey, which interestingly largely focused on fans of Premier League clubs rather than our clubs. Did touch on the point earlier that if we reach our ultimate goal of eliminating the need for owner funding, we could get to a point where fan ownership of clubs becomes more viable. So I think we are, and of course, as Damien has pointed out, we're acutely aware of fans' position on one particular club. So we always see the macro and the micro level. We're always reminded of that. I mean, I think the one thing I would perhaps say that I hadn't touched on earlier about the negotiations. So given that we started this process nearly 4 years ago, the pace by any analysis has been at best described as glacial.
And Richard, fans back redistribution of wealth throughout the pyramid and grassroots game. That comes through in lots of different surveys around football. Is that what you want to see?
Well, as you know, at the moment we redistribute 16% of our revenue outside of the Premier League into the pyramid. If I could just finish. Which I think is already a generous settlement. What we're talking about with Rick and what we've already agreed with the FA is further redistribution, a more generous settlement. So on that basis, I do agree that there's a new deal to be done. That's what we're working on. So, and that is 1.6 billion over the current 3-year cycle. So they're not insubstantial sums.
So, what do you think fans' perception of that new deal are?
Well, I'm not sure that I fully understand how fans feel about the current state of negotiations.
There's been lots of surveys done on it that suggests that most fans are not particularly in favour of the new deal. They don't think it goes far enough. I am paraphrasing a number of surveys that have gone on. So what would your view of that be?
We're very happy to look at those surveys. In the end, I have to take all views into account. I'm very happy to listen to fan views. I want to do that. So, Julie, if they are FSA surveys, I've got access to them, so I will find them. But I also have to.
Some from Fair Game UK survey have done a survey. Okay. There's other surveys.
Be very happy to look at that, and we'll do so.
And come back to us.
Yes.
Lovely. So if we move forward, and if a deal isn't agreed voluntarily, do you think there's going to be any reputational damage if a settlement has to be imposed by the new regulator on football and on clubs and on the leagues?
A question for me.
I'd like both of you to answer.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be a good outcome. I much prefer it if we're agreeing these things ourselves, as we have done since 2007. Out of the limelight, without fuss, we've agreed increasingly large redistributions to all parts of the game, and that's the way I prefer it.
Rick?
I don't quite see it that way, because as the point I've made is that this isn't really a negotiation, it's a plea on our part, because we have no leverage, we can't go anywhere else, so our view is a little different in that we think we're only going to come to the right solution through an independent view, independent analysis, because at the end of the day football is a game of vested interests, intense competitiveness, at not just at the Premier League level, at every level. It's self-interest, short-term interest tends to flow right through. So the ability to have an independent view based on hard factual analysis, we actually think is helpful. We don't necessarily think that's harmful to the reputation. We think it's a great shame that the game hasn't been able to come to a solution, but we are where we are.
And Richard, is there anything fans can do to promote an agreement? Or, based on what you said, that fans are part of the equation, is this purely financial for the clubs?
Well, as I said, there's a whole host of reforms that go into making up the games that we've been talking about. It's not just finance, it's financial regulation.
But I'm particularly asking about the financial side of things. Because it's not working at the minute. We all know it's not working. Football isn't sustainable if it carries on in the way it is at the moment. So clearly some redistribution has to occur larger than is happening and in a fairer way than is happening at the moment. But I'm concerned that you don't seem totally aware of what fans think. And fans, as we've agreed, are the lifeblood of football. If we don't have fans, we don't have football in this country. So is there anything that they can do to help bring about an agreement, and an agreement soon? Or is this basically going to be entirely down to the financial situation of clubs and the brokering?
Fans must be free to express their views, and governing bodies and organisations like the Premier League EFL must listen to the fans. But in the end, it's down to the executives and the clubs. Power, ultimately, the decision-making authority lies with the clubs themselves, the 92 across the Premier League and the EFL. They must decide what's in the best interest of the leagues, having taken on views all of the stakeholders within the game. And we believe we have done that and are doing that in the process that we're running. And on the sort of sustainability of the game point, notwithstanding all the things that I've said about wanting to, and this is a very valid debate, and I agree that we're trying to find an all-game solution. I don't agree necessarily that English football is on the sort of brink of implosion or collapse. I think it's actually a different picture to that. There are clubs out there of all denominations that are suffering financial distress. That is true. But then again, you would expect that across a broad business. But there are many great things about our business. We are suffering fewer acts of insolvency in the last decade than we have in the previous decade by some considerable difference. Financial rules have actually had some sort of impact on that, I believe, along with a new cohort of wealthier owners coming in and owning football clubs more generally. So it is demonstrably more stable, and we, EFL and the Premier League, eventually worked together on trying to find a solution for distressed clubs during COVID. We managed to have a situation where nobody went out of business during that incredibly difficult period when the pyramid lost between £2 and £3 billion irretrievably, and to some extent is still recovering from that financial shock today. So
there was no men's games went out of business. There was women's clubs closed.
Yes, I'm talking about the men's pyramid, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Julie. Richard, just going back to Julie's first question, have you ever spoken to anyone about kicking the proposals for regulation into the long grass?
Perhaps you better tell me where this comes from, because I just don't understand where this is coming from.
This isn't a conversation that you remember ever having?
Well, no, frankly, no. And the last time we were here, it was about in club meetings, had it ever been mentioned by clubs? And that's why we then spent a sort of month going through all of our meetings to find out whether it had ever been a policy. So the point is, it's not been Premier League policy or my policy to kick the regulator down the road.
So can we talk a little about Everton? I think you can probably forgive Everton fans for feeling like scapegoats at the moment. The points deduction before their appeal has been heard based on a framework that doesn't seem to be written down anywhere and rules that are supposed to be changing later on this year. Is the Premier League's action on Everton an attempt to try and prove that it can regulate itself and take decisions on breaches seriously?
No. We take our rule book very seriously. It's a handshake between all 20 clubs. All clubs look each other in the eye and say, we'll comply with these rules. And they expect the board, if clubs don't comply with those rules, to take action. And obviously we have to balance, Everton are a very important member of the Premier League, and ever present. But we also have to think about the other 19 clubs and their fan bases and the decisions that we make. The charge was made in March 23 for the first Everton case. The case was then eventually heard in October. We did make a plea at the time to try and hear the case towards the end of the season, but Everton argued against that and the Commission agreed with them. That's why it was heard in October. And then the independent commission, I just made the point so everyone understands the process that we have. Charging decisions like that are heard by an independent panel, which is selected from legal and financial experts appointed by the panel chair, Murray Rosen, KC, and he's responsible for populating the panel and appointing the panel. The Premier League has nothing to do with it. So the decisions that are made in respect of the charge are out for the PSRs, and indeed the sanction were made by an independent panel, independent of the Premier League, independent of the executive, the board, and the clubs. So we think that process was followed to the letter. Everton had the absolute right to appeal that decision and that sanction. They are doing so. That appeal will be heard shortly, and we hope it will be efficiently held, and we'll find out the decision about that as soon as possible. And I don't believe it will affect the charge which was made yesterday for a breach for the following year, full year 23, obviously where we charged both Everton and Nottingham Forest with breach of the same rules, the PSR rules.
But you think it's appropriate that Everton have suffered a 10-point deduction before they've had the chance to have the appeal heard?
Well, their appeal, it's a pending appeal, so the way that we have done it is that the points have been deducted pending the appeal. So whatever the appeal panel decides will then be, I'm assuming, the final deduction, and that will be, the asterisk will then be removed. So it doesn't really matter when it happens, as long as it happens in this season, and it will happen in this season.
But yesterday's second judgment on Everton includes the majority of the financial period for which they've already been sanctioned, in my understanding. I mean, do you accept, it's so messy, Richard, do you not accept that this fundamentally demonstrates the urgency in which we need an independent regulator to manage cases like this?
I don't think it's messy. And no one, I mean, it's a very solemn duty, I have to say, and I'm sure that Rick would agree with me. Nobody likes enforcing the financial rules. It's the first time the Premier League has done it. And these financial rules were brought in 2013-14. They were brought in with the specific purpose, post-Portsmouth actually, of ensuring that unsustainable spending couldn't go too far. And so there was a wrapper put around how much clubs could invest in pursuit of their aims. And this is the first time we've laid a charge in this specific way. And no one wants to particularly be doing it, but we must do it because we have to think about the rest of the clubs that have complied with the rules and also their fan bases, and that ultimately is the duty of the Premier League board and the EFL board in similar circumstances. So, because we've changed the rules last summer, and we can't change the rules unilaterally, we have to do it with the club's permission, where there's a more expedited process, because it's a 3-year look back. The PSR are calculated on a 3-year look back, and in Everton's case, they were the decision was made on that case a year after, in the season after they were found to be in breach. So it's a very long period, which is why we brought in expedited directions to try and help that process work more efficiently.
But can you understand fans' frustration when Man City is taking so long? Meanwhile, Everton have had now 2 charges. Notts Forest yesterday charged.
I can, but they are very different charges. That's all I would say. If any club, whether they're the current champions or otherwise, had been found in breach of the spending rules for full year 23, they would be in exactly the same position as Everton or Nottingham Forest. But the volume and character of the charges laid before Man City, which I obviously cannot talk about at all, are being heard in a completely different environment. There is a date set for that proceeding. Unfortunately, I can't tell you when that is, but that is progressing.
Can you give us you can't give us the status of the Man City and indeed the Chelsea investigations?
No, I can't give any details on Man City beyond saying that a date has been set. I can't tell you when that date is. On Chelsea, as you know, the new owners of Chelsea came forward with information to the FA, UEFA and the Premier League about previous ownership, and we're still investigating that. And we don't announce the outcome of that until we have completed those investigations.
Okay. And the other issue on this, it's being briefed that the Premier League are changing profit and sustainability rules ahead of next season. What's that going to look like?
Well, I think actually what that refers to is the fact that, as referenced around this table already, the Premier League is considering, with the EFL, is considering moving away from PSRs, profit and sustainability rules, to a squad cost ratio mechanism. And that is now in consultation. We should replace PSR in the future. PSR will be around this season and next as a bare minimum, and may even be kept alongside it. I don't know. All those decisions are yet to be made. There are no, as far as I'm aware, there are no further plans to the PSR rules planned at the moment.
Okay, and when will Everton find out if the takeover by 777 Partners is going to be confirmed by the Premier League?
As soon as we have completed the process, and unfortunately some processes take a matter of weeks, some if we haven't had satisfactory answers to the questions that we have asked, it takes a lot longer.
And so how long is this one going to take?
It has already been running for a number of weeks, so it's going to take longer.
And how much longer?
I don't know. I can't say. It is a very difficult question to answer.
Weeks, days, months, years?
Weeks. Well, hopefully weeks.
Damien, did you want to?
I just wanted to add on the sort of Everton front that can you understand why there will be a degree of cynicism among fans that we've talked a lot about the cliff edge between the Premier League and the rest of football. There does appear to be a cliff edge inside the Premier League where if you're a really big club and therefore you can not only afford the best players but the best lawyers, then you get embroiled in legal matters that take 10 years or never come to fruition. Whereas if you're Everton or not or Forest, there's an expedited procedure, to use your phrase, where suddenly, in the middle of the season, they get knocked 10 points off and get threatened with relegation, where on the pitch they wouldn't deserve that. Do you understand the cynicism that develops around that?
I do understand the issue, and I've tried to separate the two in the sense that I've said that those standard directions are for everybody. They're not just for the small clubs. So if anybody was found to be in breach and put forward their PSR calculation that was above the threshold, then we'll be doing exactly the same thing on exactly the same time frame. There's a very separate process for the other cases because they are fundamentally different in nature. And unfortunately, I can't go into all of that today.
No, but I mean, but
I do understand that from the outside looking in, fans are interested in what goes on the pitch. They're less interested in financial regulation unless it impacts on their club and how that works throughout the system. They are interested in fairness, and I think most fans want to know that the regulatory bodies, in this case the Premier League, will enforce the rules and will have significant penalties for breaching very important rules as a disincentive to do it. It is much better, obviously, that all of our clubs comply with the rules at all times, and therefore we don't have to talk about these things at all. That is the perfect world we'd all like to live in. It isn't the case at the moment, and so we have to go through this process. And we want to be transparent and open, we want people to understand it, and we're prepared to have a dialogue, and we obviously continuing to work with the clubs involved here on how that process plays out.
There's a wider point in principle, I think, which does affect the integrity of the league, which is that if you get to a situation where 1, 2, maybe 3, 4 clubs start getting points deductions in the middle of the season, and that's the punishment that the football authorities reach for, then throughout that season the league is pretty meaningless. And suddenly, sorry, being a Reading fan, we got relegated by 1 point, having had 6 points taken off in April, in March. That kind of thing means that the whole league itself becomes a bit meaningless. So I do think it requires a bit of hard thinking on the part of football authorities about it's the underlying point. How do you punish owners who may have breached the rules, and absolutely they should be punished, without actually both punishing the fans and also, from just the league administration's point of view, making the league a bit meaningless? Because if the league starts becoming meaningless, then we lose the game.
Just a perspective on that. One of the weaknesses of the rules, and bearing in mind that this started from UEFA, so Premier League in a sense had to adopt the financial fair play rules. It was a start. Football had no financial regulation, and one of my favourite expressions in football is that the opposite of doing nothing is doing something. May not be perfect, but at least UEFA had a start. One of the big problems and the challenges, and you're absolutely right about points deductions, is that you're looking retrospectively and punishing for things that might have happened 3 years ago. One of the big advantages in moving to squad cost ratios and controlling costs is you can do that in real time. So instead of having to look back at clubs and punish, you can actually, as leagues, refuse to register players. So you're actually monitoring, controlling budgets prospectively rather than retrospectively. Now, there'll still be complaints because you're constraining the squad, but then if you're going to have the philosophy of trying to keep clubs alive, you have to have some form of financial regulation. But as I said, operating it in real time and upfront rather than trying to look back 3 years is, we think, much, much better.
Thank you, Damon. Last but not least, Rupert.
In my position of last but not least, I must say, listening to all this, it does sound like everything is very Premier League stacked to these 12 or 13 or even 5 or 6. I mean, if, foreign buyers can come in when the warning lights were there, this Dai Young, I think he'd done this in China and in Belgium, so sort of, it was foreseeable this might happen. And he's not paying the fines, is that right? Seems resistant to all of this. And you guys are, what would meaningful fan involvement actually look like? Because you've said that, fans should have a say. But if all this is happening with Everton as well, they do loads of stuff in the community. They're being massively penalised on criteria that's very unclear and is changing again, the goalposts literally shifting. It just feels how are fans going to have a say? Do we have to have the Germany 50.1% model of actual ownership?
I think there are quite a few questions in there, and some of them are definitely mine. I think we have said ultimately, if we have proper, fairer redistribution so that clubs don't require £15 million of owner funding, maybe that makes fan ownership more viable. That depends on whether fans want to own clubs, but certainly that is a direction that we can head in. I think it's a bit facile at times to just think in terms of, well, we can't penalise the fans of the clubs that has transgressed, because we have to think of the fans of the other 71 clubs that haven't. So we always have to keep that in balance. And the idea of simply separating owner from club is not really that's not normally viable, because it is the club that has transgressed. I said in the Reading case, we are specifically going after the owner. But we think if we have a better regulatory system, if we have a fairer distribution system, then we will get better quality owners, which in part is why we're more than happy to be moving to the regulator. We're more than happy for the regulator to take over the owners and directors test, so that we all have a common aim in bringing about lasting improvements.
Rick has spoken eloquently on the situation at Reading. I think you said something there about the penalising fans. As I said, the best thing for everybody is for clubs to stay within the rules. You also said that you didn't think the rules were clear to fans, and I think they are clear. They've been in place for 10 years, and people understand that.
But the Everton criterion is far from transparent, isn't it? How they've been deducted so many points.
Okay, so
it's not
so on that particular issue of the Premier League's approach to sanctioning, whether it be a rule breach for for PSR rules or other rules, we have an open sanctioning regime, and that's an active decision to leave it to the independent panel to decide, because it gives them maximum flexibility to decide in the circumstances, having listened to all the mitigating arguments made by the club and by the Premier League, to make its own decision. And whilst that may not be clear, we believe it's the fairest way to do it.
I mean, it just looks very fishy. And again, with foreign buyers, if it's governments, they can do all this sports washing stuff. It just feels this is all about cold hard cash. Some of the questions Julie was saying, non-league games are having massive attendances through the roof. Shouldn't more of your pyramidal structure go down to those people at the very bottom, Fitzhanger FC, Hanwell Town, those kind of people that don't have the huge broadcasting rights and wages bills stuff that we've been talking about, or we've alluded to today?
As I said, we redistribute £1.6 billion outside of the pyramid. That goes to all parts of the game. I'm not quite sure which tier Hanwell Town are in, but it goes as far as the National League divisions. The money we put into the Football Foundation, the Premier League Stadium Fund, is available to all parts of the game, including women's game and women's facilities. So there is money that goes to all parts of the game that comes from the Premier League, and we believe that's the right thing to do, and we're proud of it.
I mean, it just feels with these parachute payments, it's a bit of a prolongation of the status quo rather than the real grassroots. And the sort of surprising things when someone shoots up, I wonder if they'll be more unlikely. You mentioned, I was there when Brentford went up actually at Wembley, and there were grown men in tears. They'd seen it happen at the old Wembley, the new Wembley. They were so excited. I wonder if you're sustaining what's happening now with the way these payments work, that there'll be less fun moments, little people. I don't know, I remember when Cameroon got in the quarterfinals. When was that, 1990 or something? Those surprise things. I just feel, I don't know.
There's lots of surprises, and I think the aspiration that makes the pyramid tick is still there. It's still, we've got Luton back as our 51st club. So the Premier League is just over 30 years old. It's had 51 clubs in it during that period. There's plenty of opportunity to get into the Premier League. We welcome everybody, whether you're Luton or Brentford, who've made a success of their promotion, are doing really, really well. It's up to the club to make that opportunity work for them, and we believe we provide the platform to be able to do that.
I wanted to ask on something else that there's been resistance to regulation, and that's the 3 p.m. broadcast blackout slot. I think it's been there since the 60s, and there's good arguments for it that match day income stays and all those kind of things. But there is an argument, women's football, we've not really dwelt on today, is in many ways a separate entity, correctly so. Last week at this committee, the Sports Minister said there is an argument for lifting that 3 p.m. ban in the case of women's football, so it has a dedicated slot. What would you say to that, both of you?
Rick, do you want to go first?
Yes. So we support the growth of women's football. First and foremost, that we think the potential is enormous. It's very, very important that we embrace the growth of women's football, and in so doing, hope to not to repeat many of the mistakes that we've made in the men's game. The Article 48 blackout is complex, and it's not as simple as saying, well, we can apply it differently for the women's game. There is one Article 48 that applies to the game. We can't sort of conjoin the men's and the women's when it suits and separate them when it suits. So our interpretation and the legal interpretation is that Article 48 embraces the entire game. So if we disapply it for women's football, we also have to disapply it for men's football. That has far-reaching implications, because the whole idea of Article 48 is not just to protect attendances at games. Historically, it was always to protect participation. 3 o'clock on Saturday was seen as being really important. So that is by far from a trivial position, and ironically, I think Article 48 is maybe the one area where the Premier League and the EFL is absolutely joined at the hip. There's absolutely nothing between us on that. We do think that very, very careful consideration is needed before Article 48 goes.
Maybe a small celebration, we can agree on something, albeit that we're trying to resolve a thorny issue, which is how do you best help develop the women's game in this country. Like Rick, we are great supporters of the game. Our clubs are big investors in it and big participants in it. Indeed, we've made had a number of discussions with the FA over the years about how we can assist, whether it's right the Premier League should become involved, whether it should be entirely separate, and that's an ongoing thing. So very recently, our clubs agreed that it would make a financial loan to the new co, which has been set up at the top of the women's game. And the Premier League could have a seat on the board and also provide a whole bunch of services to the game in respect of advice about how to commercially develop the league. And I hope that's the start of something that still has to be approved by the WSL board. But I hope that's the start of a relationship where the men's game can help the women's game to develop on a whole raft of different areas. But I agree with Rick. Unfortunately, you cannot divide Article 48 commitment into different bits. There's nothing to suggest that we can do that, and we have a commitment going forward to apply Article 48 across the FA, the Premier League and the EFL for the foreseeable future.
I mean, in some ways it has been broken anyway, because, I don't know, our kids' generation know how to stream these things illegally from foreign channels. So, I mean, in some ways it's eroding as opposed to in the 60s when it was set up anyway.
Illegally, yes.
When would you like to see the women's game televised, if we're not going to have a dedicated slot, or if that's not going to be...
In a sense, nobody has a dedicated slot. I mean, the Premier League is under a sort of regulatory obligation to televise 200 matches a year, and it does so outside of the closed period. Does that in 5 slots, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday and 1 on Monday night. But the EFL are regularly televised in similar slots as well. So it's difficult to find a dedicated slot for anybody. There are gaps in our calendar when they overlap, where the women's game can take precedent in international breaks and things like that. But I think the closer we work together, the more likely we are to find some additional opportunities for the women's game to take advantage of in the broadcast markets. And I know they're currently in the broadcast market at the moment, trying to find new partnerships for the foreseeable future.
I mean, hasn't that lack of a dedicated slot been part of a, you know, if there was a consistent, dedicated, predictable viewing slot, don't you think that's sort of hindering the commercial development of women's football? Couldn't that be a way
when that dedicated slot would be? I mean,
wouldn't want
imagine
to
a
see
world
one
where
at
Article
all.
48 didn't exist. It wouldn't just be create an opportunity. If it didn't exist, essentially, if the commitment to it was taken away, then you would see everybody televised on a Saturday at 3 p.m, including German football, Spanish football.
But when should it be if it's not 3 o'clock on a Saturday?
Well, if it has to be a dedicated slot, I think what you mean by that is when no other men's football is being broadcast, that's very difficult to find a slot that exists that is attractive to the women's game, because if you put it on at Sunday lunchtime at 12 p.m, that's not a particularly attractive slot. Sunday evening, Friday nights, it's not obvious what the answer to the question is, Ruben.
Rick, are you of the same opinion?
I think Richard's highlighted the practical issues, absolutely. And again, nobody has a dedicated slot. We're all fighting for slots.
And you think that would not be a good thing, because it could help grow the women's game? We've seen with the Lionesses, it's at an all-time high, can go higher.
I'm totally convinced about the potential of the women's game, and absolutely convinced about what the Lionesses have done. The thing we like most about the new co is the 75-25 revenue split, which we think is very progressive and will lead to the sustainability of the game. And not against helping them to grow their TV audience in any way, shape or form, but it's the simple and facile answer would be yes, of course we'll find a dedicated slot. That wouldn't be the right answer. We're more than happy to try. We're more than happy to support the women's game. But it is a complex question. It's not a trivial. It's not a binary question. It's not a trivial question. It's a complex question because of all the interest in the game.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Rita. Well, at least women's football has united you all in something that you can agree. And let's see if we can find something else. The committee's recently made a report into safety at major sporting events. You'll probably have seen the private members' bill from our former colleague on this committee, Kevin Brennan, which we've backed to create a specific criminal offence for unauthorised entry to football matches and ensure those who break the law can be banned from them. Is the need for this kind of legislation something that you can both agree on as well? Richard?
Yes.
Oh, good, nice one-word
Yes.
answer. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Before we conclude this panel, is there anything that either of you would like to add that we haven't asked you today that you would like to get on the record? Richard?
No, thank you.
Rick?
I think we've covered everything. Please publish the bill. Please get on with the State of Football review.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear from what we've heard today that the football governance bill and indeed the independent regulator is something that needs to happen as soon as possible, and that's something clearly that the committee's been calling for a long time. But it isn't in the interests of fans that they have to wait for that to happen before a sustainable deal can come forward from the EFL and the Premier League. I think if this was a Pompey game that I was at and you two were referees, we'd be at the point where the fans were about to sing "You Don't Know What You're Doing." So let's hope that the barriers we've discussed today can be overcome as quickly as possible. Thank you very much. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 ParliamentLive.tv. 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 ParliamentLive.tv.